Be strong.
So the app is based on this thing called velocity-based training. So
Correct.
and we're all familiar with this, like the term and the methodology behind it. But maybe if you can give us, I guess, and the audience a bit of a general overview as to what this is based upon and sort of the rationale behind this type of training that that metric helps to facilitate.
Yeah, so I suppose the name velocity-based training is an interesting one. I think it's kind of the wrong name. So you hear that and people think, oh, well, I'm doing light weights, I'm throwing the bar into the roof, Olympic lifting, jumps with squat with barbells, things like that. The idea that you're training at high velocity. But really what we're doing is we're just taking velocity, which is just another metric or another way of sort of quantifying our training. So, we measure reps, we measure sets, we measure rest times, how much weight's on the bar, tempo, things like that. Velocity of the movement is just another way of measuring how well you lifted. So you might lift 100 kilos one week, for example. When whatever velocity you lift that way, that will change between the weeks. And so you can use that as an indicator of maybe how fatigued you are. So for example, Sean and Damo, you guys did your half marathon on the weekend. If we got you under the bar and started doing your normal warm-up sets for your squats today, my guess would be that your velocities would be like through the floor. They would be moving slower. Range of motion might be a bit shorter because you're pretty stiff through your ankles, potentially in your calves. Like your performance on those lifts would be able to measure with velocity, range of motion, those kind of metrics, and go, today's not the day to push hard. Today is probably a day where we should just do some warm-up sets, do some easy stuff, get some blood flow, move on, recover, and then wait till later in the week when those velocities pick back up. And then maybe that's now time to start pushing back into regular training. So it's really just a way of quantifying the quality of your training. We talk about RPE, we kind of measure things like that. We go, oh, that was an 8 out of 10. Velocity helps add to that and go, well, it was an 8 out of 10. And yes, it was a slow rep. So that was a tough set. So I should probably adjust my training accordingly.
It almost reminds me, or I kind of make comparisons to almost using GPS units out on the field. They're not it's not a training methodology. It's more just a way of tracking what you're doing as opposed to using that to dictate your whole session.
Exactly. It's not GPS-based training.
Yeah.
We're just doing football training and our running work, and we're using GPS data to help us make good decisions around that. That's a perfect analogy. And so people very often, and we're still in the early days with velocity-based training, I think it's still a very young science and a very young application. People kind of get into a camp. It's like, you have to be a velocity-based training guy. And so once you become that guy or that girl, that coach, you've got no choice but to only use velocity. It's like RPE goes out the window, percentages of 1RM go out the window, using rest periods and tempos, they go out the window. It's like, well, no, it's just another piece that adds into that. So when you're using GPS, it doesn't mean you don't do 20-meter sprints. Just because the GPS can't measure those 20-meter sprints doesn't mean it's not a good training method. And so same here, you would use velocity-based training when it's appropriate, on the right exercises at the right time. And so sometimes you might track peak metrics. You might look at peak power output, for example, on Olympic lifts or jump squats. Then other times with, say, your deadlifts or your bench press, you might look at mean velocity or range of motion or tempo. You can get all these pieces of data out of good velocity-based training devices or technology.
Where did you first come across it, though? So when did you actually start to adapt this or use this form of training as your practice going forward?
Yeah, so the technology's been around for a while now. So they're called linear positional transducers, which is effectively just a string on a spring that's connected to the bar. And as you lift, it uncoils, it's measured in the device and tells those numbers to a screen or to an iPad or something like that. So linear positional transducers, or LPTs, they've been around since like 99, 2000. So they've been around for a while. And so Durham, who's the founder at Core Advantage and my boss, effectively, he has had one since I think 2010. And so when I started an internship in 2013, we would get it out from time to time, and we'd put it on the bar, and we'd have little competitions, and we'd give the athletes different metrics to kind of chase. And instantly, I was like, that's what we should be doing. It just makes so much sense that we should be measuring velocity when we train. We spend all this time worrying about doing the right sets and reps and making sure we're doing the right load and percentage of 1RM. Velocity, it's a little trickier to measure, or it has been before metric came along. But it's such a valuable metric that we really need to be measuring that, and on a regular basis, seeing how that's tracking over time. So if you do a half marathon on a weekend, And you can use objective data to see how much of a hole you're in. Not just go, and you guys know right now that you're stiff and sore, so we could guess pretty well that you're going to be 10, 20% down. But maybe 10 days from now, you're still 10% down. So there's still this neural fatigue. Your body might be feeling better, your joints might be recovered, but your nervous system might still be fried. And so velocity-based training will give us the ability to calibrate that on a really specific level. And so, I sort of knew about it vaguely from 2013. It was very early on then. There wasn't much writing or research being done on it. And then more products and more ideas and more people started talking about it on podcasts and blogs and doing courses and things like that. And it just kept coming back. I kept hearing other things like, oh, that's a really clever way to do that. And then about 2.5 years ago, I went really deep. I made a course that we got on our website online. And then I started training with my brother, and we started talking about how we would do it if we were going to build our own product. And initially we thought about building our own hardware, building our own string on a bar. And the more we tried that, the more we realized the problem wasn't building a different hardware. It was actually just getting rid of hardware altogether. That was really where we sort of came with it. It's like, let's just get rid of the hardware, get that out of the way, stop that being a burden and a trouble and an issue when you're training, and just put it, your phone, put it on a little tripod, put it in the corner, hit record, and away you go.
Is it something, do you think, that you need to have a coach working with you for? Like, say for someone that's never used VBT before, they got no idea what it means. Is someone like that able to use it, or do you think you need that extra expertise from someone else?
Yeah, so it's an interesting one. I think the expertise helps, but I don't think it's essential. So I think oftentimes, and we're still in that transition point from an early science into a sort of mature, more established method. I think just like GPS, when it started, it was expensive, it was cumbersome, you didn't really know what you were doing with the numbers. Whereas now most amateur runners have GPS on their watch, and they can see that, they can see pace, they can see incline, they can see all these different variables and go, oh, that session was good, bad, slow, fast, whatever it might be. And so it's the same thing with velocity-based training. It's just we're 10 years behind GPS.
Yep.
So currently a lot of the methods for using VBT are quite sophisticated, and they're the ones being talked about a lot. Load velocity profiling, 1RM estimates. These are good methods and good strategies, but they are just that. They're just a method or a strategy. It's not the only thing you can do. One of the simplest things you can do with velocity data is just compare yourself week on week. So 1 week you do your 100 kilo deadlift and you're at 0.6 meters per second. Next week you come in and you do it at 0.62. Well, that's progress. You're a little bit faster, a little more explosive than you were last week. So having a coach is good to do those, sophisticated profiling and testing and sort of those sort of methods. But for the really basic stuff, just competing against yourself, competing against the person next to you, trying to lift a little faster each week, or go a little longer range of motion or a little more power, that's really easy. That's just augmented feedback. That's just objective feedback beyond just how much weight's on the bar, but how well you're lifting or how explosively you're moving. And so we can set new goals and new targets, if you like, or zones that we want to lift within just based on last week's performance. So last week I did 80, 100, 120 at this speed, and this speed. Next week I'll try and beat all those sets. I'll try and do the same number of reps and weight, but I'll try and do them all a little bit faster, or with a little less fatigue, or a little faster tempo or slower tempo. If your goal is hypertrophy, maybe you want to actually go the opposite and use velocity-based training to slow your training down in a rehab or a hypertrophy setting. These are all really good options. So a lot of the times you'll read, a beginner's guide to velocity-based training. They'll talk about, you have to do this, you have to use the speed zones, and you have to train at starting strength or speed strength or strength speed or whatever it might be. It's not the case. You can do whatever you want. Like, it's just another metric. Use that how you will. And I think competing with yourself and getting feedback week on week and trying to beat yourself is one of the easiest, best ways that anyone could do.
Yeah, I think it's a good way to not sort of take focus away from just the weight on the bar or the weight you're lifting as well. It's just another, because I think a lot of people do get caught up in those numbers, and it's like, well, why haven't I improved the weight on the bar? But you're actually doing it, say, more efficiently or faster. As you mentioned, if you're comparing just to yourself, how long do you think you need to sort of accrue data to make meaningful comparisons to your past performances? Yeah.
So the simple answer is one session.
Yeah.
Like if I do a session, we'll use the deadlift again. I do 60, 80, 100, 120, and then I've got my working sets at 130, for example. Once I've done one set of 130 and I'll go into my next set of 130, I can compare that second set to that first set. And so within a session, you can already start making assessments based on how you go. So I might have planned to do 5x5 at 130, but on the fourth set, my velocity's fallen off by like 20%.
Yeah.
So I was hitting 0.6s, now I'm hitting 0.4s for meters per second sort of speeds. I might not need that fifth set. It might be a good idea just to either do a back off set, do a triple instead of a set of 5, or just leave it and not even do it at all. And so you can see that, right, you've maxed out how much work you need to do. That's a single sort of session feedback to feedback. You could then compare today's deadlifts to last week's deadlifts. But I also think that can be a little jumpy. You can have a day where you lift in the afternoon versus the morning, and that can have a big impact on things. You could lift on a Sunday after you had a few beers the night before, and that could impact your performance as well. Like little things like that might have a massive impact, and you might get this seesawing of your velocities. So you might be jumping at shadows. Oh, last week I was really slow, so this week I'm really fast, so I'm going to go for a PB. It's like, yeah, but last week, you lifted on a Sunday and you had some beers or you had a crap night's sleep, so that will affect things. I think in that sense, in that sense, it's good to look at trends over time. And I like to then compare to, say, a 30-day average. So say you squat once a week, over 30 days, once a week, you're going to do probably 3, maybe 4 sessions worth of data. If you take the average of those 3 or 4 sessions and compare them to today's session, that gives you a good baseline. And so it's like the average of the last 4 workouts, I hit 0.6 meters per second. This week I'm 0.59, slightly below, not enough to worry about. I'll proceed with my plan. Or I'm 0.65. Hey, I'm flying today. I'm killing it. Let's push up. Let's make this a PB day. Let's get after it. And you can make those adjustments on time. So I think comparing yourself to last session is the easiest way to do. Just go session by session, try and set a new velocity PB each time you lift. That's a good way to get intent. But there comes a point when, weight no longer becomes an ideal goal, and you actually don't want to lift more weight because maybe you're an endurance athlete and the neural fatigue just isn't worth it. Maybe you're at that point of the law of diminishing returns where, the benefit of going heavy is starting to level off. So in those situations, you're chasing more intent, and comparing yourself to, say, a 30-day average is a much, much more valuable and gives you a smoother sort of look at your data. So you can go compared to 30 days, that should be a nice smooth increase by a tiny bit each week.